I wrote an article, came out yesterday, entitled A Response to the Global Center for Religious Research's Call for Evangelicals to Repudiate Trump. This was an open letter signed by 58 leaders, mainly Christian. There was a rabbi among them, but otherwise Christian leaders, professing Christian leaders, philosophers, academics, pastors, and they were calling on evangelicals to utterly repudiate other evangelicals who had, quote, entangled themselves with President Trump politically. And there are points that the letter makes that I agree with, that I affirm. There are other points that I categorically differ with. And in particular, I have a real issue with the question of hypocrisy. So I want to read through the letter. This is the world we live in. Again, this is what we're going through in church. These are the divisions that we face. These are the different points of view that we have to address. So let's do it together. That's what we want to do here on the Line of Fire broadcast. So again, January 18th is when they published this open letter. Someone sent it to me. I didn't see it when it first came out. I had never heard of the Global Center for Religious Research before, but most of what's happening in terms of organizations, religious organizations, I don't know most of them. There's a ton of stuff out there. So it's not to say it's not an important organization, simply to say I'd never heard of it. And they posted on January 18th an open letter to evangelicals of moral conscience. So I'm going to read this to you, okay? Help us end the cult-like determination to ignore, excuse, and justify Mr. Trump's blatant and obvious moral depravity. That's the subheading, all right? So they speak of his blatant and obvious moral depravity. And they say this: Dear American evangelical friends, it is with great sadness that we, the undersigned faith leaders, biblical scholars, philosophers, and other academics, many of whom began our walks of faith in the evangelical tradition, hereby call on all American evangelical Christians of moral conscience who recognize and regret the corrupting and corrosive influence of Donald J. Trump to join us in repudiating those evangelical leaders and institutions that have politically entangled themselves with him. We believe this action to be an urgent moral imperative because these leaders and institutions, which have unfortunately become the dominant voice of modern American evangelicalism, have shown themselves to be obstinately bound to the control of influences overtly opposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ and have resisted repeated pleas to disentangle themselves. Now, I want to be totally candid with you, friends. I'm all for being direct, but there's an old saying that you don't insult the jury when you go to appeal to the jury. And it seems to me right out of the gate that there's some problems the way this starts. First, they mention many of them began their walks of faith in the evangelical tradition. So here's what I don't understand. Maybe they're former evangelicals that became Greek Orthodox or that became Roman Catholic or joined some other Christian expression or simply left Christian faith entirely. Why do they have a special authority or moral right to speak to those of us who are evangelicals? I don't follow that. In other words, if you're no longer part of our tradition, then why are you addressing our tradition as if you have a certain right to? It'd be like if I was a former Roman Catholic, left the Catholic Church, and then right as a Protestant, hey, to my Catholic friends, look, I used to be Catholic, I'm making an appeal to you. That raised a question for me, but you'll see the question deepens as we go on. But as I read through this, notice the strong words, the corrupting and corrosive influence of Donald J. Trump, and then notice that evangelicals that are standing with him, they have obstinately bound themselves to the control of influences overtly opposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ and have resisted repeated pleas to disentangle themselves. In other words, there is no other point of view. There is no other Christian perspective. There is no other right and wrong here. No, those that are standing with the president and feeling that he is the best choice for our nation right now compared to the other candidates or compared to Hillary Clinton, they are against the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they are obstinately refusing pleas to disentangle themselves. And you say, well, but aren't they really talking about those that have completely joined themselves to the president and justify all his behavior? Partly yes, partly no. You'll see as we go on. We make this call not seeking to destroy the evangelical tradition. It's nice for you to say that, but rather to prune from its structure those corrupting influences that have caused the tradition to become more infatuated with political power than following the explicit and unequivocal moral expectations that come with following Jesus Christ. Our hope is that an evangelicalism of strong moral conscience might regrow in its place and return to its first love. To accept this call is not to abandon theological doctrines, religious practices, or expressions of your Christian faith. Instead, is to affirm that you are a follower of Christ, not political ideologies, before and above all else. Of course, I affirm that we are followers of Jesus above and beyond any political ideology, followers of Jesus above and beyond any party. The loyalty that you may have to an elected official completely pales. It disappears in light of our loyalty to the Lord. All right, to the extent you identify as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, that completely pales to how you identify as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus. I agree with that. Here are my two problems. One, what about all the liberals and progressives and even some of the signers of this letter, or those quoted in the letter or quoted in some of the addendums that they added on, who've worked heavily with the Democrats for years? Why is it okay for liberal, progressive Christians, so-called, to work with Democrats? That's all right. That's not getting politically entangled. But when evangelicals work with Republicans, that's getting politically entangled. Do I believe that in certain ways we get too politically entangled and wed ourselves too much to a political party? Yes. I've said that many a time. At the same time, this strikes me as quite hypocritical. Let me dig a little deeper. Why is it that many of us voted for Donald Trump? It was because of the issues we felt were important that he would stand for. That had to do with our faith. They continue. Christianity Today's editor, Mark Galli, recently argued that Trump should be removed from office because of his grossly immoral character. So notice, present tense, his grossly immoral character. So I'm just asking, in terms of, say, sexual immorality, what has Donald Trump done that is sexually immoral, to our knowledge, since he decided to run for president, since he was elected, since he's been in the White House? Just wondering if someone could point that out. And interestingly, they quote Mark Galli's editorial and quote his name 11 times in this letter. And Mark Galli's editorial, even though I appreciated him raising certain points, was rightly rejected by many, many evangelical leaders. Mr. Galli worries that if evangelicals continue to support President Trump, they will lose all moral credibility. Although Galli admits that President Trump has accomplished certain things that evangelicals like, he maintains that none of the president's positives can balance the moral and political danger that he has created in the name of God. This concern was then reinforced by Christianity Today's president and CEO, Timothy Dalrymple. And I took exception with both Mr. Dalrymple's article and Mr. Galli's, respecting their Christian views, but taking exception. So again, here's the big question. And it's the question that we have to weigh. Has the good the president's done outweighed the bad? That's the question we have to ask. And can we say we vote for him with the good, but we don't like the bad? How does that hurt our moral credibility? Again, if we say that fighting for the life of the unborn is major, that being the first president to speak at the March for Life is major, that standing with Israel in such a pronounced way and moving the embassy to Jerusalem and the new peace proposal and the way that stands with Israel, that's major, that standing for our religious rights and freedoms is major, that fighting against world terrorism is major, that fighting against radical LGBTQ activism is major, that even economic policies that have been put forth are going to help poor and needy people, that's major. So we don't like his personality in many ways and the way he operates and the way he speaks of others and things like that, and find it to be dishonest at times. However, overall, because we have choices in terms of who we vote for, this is why we vote. How does that compromise our moral credibility? If I look the other way, if I justify sinful behavior, if I downplay character, that's one thing. But if I say, I see strong character here in keeping his word and standing for these very righteous and important principles, and I see weak character here, and evangelicals who are close to him, they're not applauding the weak character. They're speaking into his life to help him and strengthen him, and they continue to do that while thanking him for all the good that he does. Somehow, though, for the signers of this letter, no, it's black and white. If you stand with Trump, you vote for Trump, you've compromised your Christianity. I respectfully beg to differ. There was a cartoon on this same website. So this same GCRR, Global Center for Religious Research, another one of the signers there, wrote an article referencing this open letter to evangelicals of moral conscience. And there is a cartoon from political cartoonist David Fitzsimmons, and there is a slick-looking evangelical leader. He's got a bolo tie, so he's obviously, cowboy, Southern, Western, that kind of thing. And then there's Trump, and he literally has horns. He's orange, his whole body, and he's in flames. He has 666 on his left shoulder. And the caption, evangelical speaking, as long as he's pro-life, we can overlook some minor character issues. This is the level of mockery coming to those who say, we don't like the character issues and the shortcomings there, and we do believe that does damage and can be harmful to many and even degrades the office of the presidency. But given our choices, given our circumstances, we feel a vote for him is the pragmatic and right way to go as followers of Jesus. No, this open letter will have none of it. They can mock us like that. That's okay. That's being Christian. To mock us like that and to make Donald Trump out to be the Antichrist and those that stand with him to be in league with Satan himself. They can do that. That's okay. That's Christian. But they're concerned about our witness. That's what strikes me as hypocritical. As we read on in the open letter, as we do that, you'll see that some of the people that they quote, Christian leaders rebuking us for standing with Trump, are people who, for example, advocate strongly same-sex so-called marriage and gay activism and reinterpreting the Bible on these passages. And yet they're rebuking our morality and our fidelity to the scriptures and our Christian conviction. That concerns me. That, to me, is blatantly hypocritical and failing to take the beam out of one's own eye before asking someone else to take out the speck of dust. January 18th, the Global Center for Religious Research posted an open letter to evangelicals of moral conscience. I wrote a response which was posted yesterday, and I want to quote from the end of this letter. The end of the letter says this, and I have it in my article, and it's in bold in their letter. Until such time as those evangelical institutions and leaders disentangle themselves from the corrupting power and privilege that their complicity with Mr. Trump has provided them, we call upon Christians of good conscience to disentangle themselves from them, join us in repudiating them, and be prepared to explain why. We know it won't be easy. We know it may take different forms for different people. We believe that to heal our individual consciences, to heal the conscience of our country, and to heal the conscience of American evangelicalism, it must be done. Now, again, the people writing, many of them were former evangelicals, but they want to talk to us about the evangelical conscience. So here's where I have a problem. One of the signers of the letter, one of the men that they quote in the letter is Dr. Brian McLaren, formerly pastor, best-selling author, traveling, speaking. And Brian McLaren takes us to task for our support of Trump. Yet Reverend McLaren participated in the same-sex, quote, marriage of his son to another man. I personally have an issue with someone lecturing me about being hypocritical when they, as ministers of the gospel, perform a same-sex, quote, wedding ceremony. Here, I'll give you another example. In the open letter, they cite Pastor John Pavlovic, whom I've tried to reach out to numerous times to say, let's sit and talk. You come on my radio show. Let's have dialogue in one way or another. December 2018, he tweeted, when hopelessly phobic people of faith like Dr. Michael L. Brown claim that God is against, quote, homosexual practice, So he's calling me hopelessly phobic. This is Pastor Pavlovic. A lot of things he said I would agree with, and wanting to reach out to the marginalized and the hurting with the gospel of Jesus. But hang on. Pastor, you're going to tell me I'm hypocritical in supporting Donald Trump, whereas you are calling me hopelessly phobic for saying that God is against homosexual practice. Another tweet. This is the kind of fearful Jurassic understanding of sexuality that is getting people killed. Someone else's gender, identity, sexual orientation, marriage, or sexual activity are none of your business. So in other words, the church doesn't have the right to preach against adultery. The church doesn't have the right to preach against sexual immorality in general. The church doesn't have the right to preach against porn. The church doesn't have the right to preach against same-sex, quote, marriage. No, that's none of anybody's business. Well, someone made it our business by knocking on our doors in our schools, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our courts, in our places of business, and pushing forth aggressive agenda. And the Bible addresses these things. So again, this is problematic for me. When someone is calling me hypocritical for supporting President Trump for the good things that he does, while being a Christian minister, a pastor, and supporting LGBT activism, supporting transgender activism, supporting same-sex, quote, marriage, and calling us hopelessly phobic and Jurassic, and if we differ with that, let me ask a question, and I say this in my article. Reverends McLaren and Pavlovic are accusing evangelicals of hypocrisy because we feel President Trump is a better choice than Hillary Clinton or any of the current Democratic candidates. Or are they saying we're being hypocritical because we feel he's doing a better job at stopping the slaughter of the unborn, of combating world terrorism, of fighting for religious liberties, of opposing LGBT extremism, of standing with Israel? We could even argue that Trump is doing a better job of helping the poor, not to mention working harder for prison reform. But no, if we support him, we're the hypocrites. Whereas those who support, say, LGBT activism, they're the righteous Christians. I have a problem with that. I mention in my letter one of the signers of the 58 initial signers on this Global Center for Religious Research open letter to evangelicals of January 18th. One of the signers is the very Reverend Penny Bridge, who has earned her own page, I note, on the San Diego LGBT Pride website. So among her many accomplishments is offering blessings at events including 3 Harvey Milk diversity breakfasts. Honoring Harvey Milk and offering blessings there. And serving as, quote, get this, as spiritual advisor to the Imperial Court's Queen Mother of the Americas. They're not talking about Mary. Empress Nicole the Great. Is this drag? I mean, what is this? And yet these people accuse Donald Trump of moral depravity. So as I note in the article, and I've said this over and again, along with many of my evangelical colleagues who support Trump, I hate the damage he does with his words. I deplore his attacks on individuals. And I believe that in some ways he's degraded the office of the president. In fact, it's rare that I write an article in support of Trump without adding in these caveats to the point of sound like a broken record. And again, those evangelical leaders who are close to the president, they don't celebrate the aspects of his behavior they don't appreciate. They speak to him. They encourage him. They speak to him about Christian principles and godly principles and urge him to step up in different ways. And look, I wrote the book, Donald Trump is Not My Savior, an evangelical leader speaks his mind about the man he supports as president. I wrote that article to get a certain message out. So, and I've said over and again, as followers of Jesus, our identity must be found first and foremost in solidarity with the Savior, to whom we owe our very souls. The president simply gets our vote. And at this point, President Trump will have my vote in 2020. Now look, let's just realize that as President Trump was putting forth a peace plan which would be very favorable to Israel, as President Trump was speaking as the first president ever to address the March for Life, as President Trump was doing these things over a period of 5 days, so from Friday to Tuesday, you have headlines, say, for example, presidential candidate Joe Biden, and he's putting forth the position that transgender rights is the new civil rights cause of the day. Yeah, this is another statement made by former Vice President Biden, that transgender rights, that is the transgender equality, is the civil rights issue of our time. I don't know how you feel about that as an African American, perhaps involved in the civil rights movement, perhaps as one saying America still has a ways to go to really have true equality for blacks and whites together in America. I wonder how you feel about transgender activists hitching their cause now to the civil rights movement. But that's one thing for transgender activists to do it and say, yeah, it's a similar thing. I was born this way and I'm being discriminated by society because of the way I was born and because I'm different. And it's a parallel, and that's how they see it. It's one thing for them to do it. It's another thing for a presidential candidate to make that statement. And then Senator Elizabeth Warren, presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, has made similar statements in terms of a cabinet she's going to have and the diversity of it and what it would reflect. So what you're talking about is a very aggressive pushing forth of an agenda that ends up being a direct attack on our religious freedoms, a direct attack on values that we hold to, a direct attack on gender distinctions, a direct attack on what our children are going to be taught in the school. And there are now more and more cases coming up, different states working on this now, along with legal cases that are potentially heading to the Supreme Court that address issues of transgender activism. Where you say, look, I do not feel right about my 15-year-old girl sharing locker rooms and bathroom stalls, shower stalls with 15-year-old boys who are playing on their I don't feel right about any of that. And our girls are coming home, they're traumatized. Okay, there are even states saying we need to do something about this. I can tell you where this is going if there's a Democrat candidate. I can tell you where it's going. This is no mystery. We know what was done under President Obama in these ways. We know what was put on our schools. Look, I live in North Carolina. North Carolina was threatened with losing all of its federal funding for the schools unless it complied with transgender activism in the bathrooms. That's outrageous. So while I don't like the way President Trump does a lot of things, I'm grateful that he's pushed back against this activism. And I can look someone in the eye and say, I care about you. I love you. I hate the fact that you've suffered so much in your life, but I don't believe that you are genuinely a male trapped in a female body or the reverse. And I believe that through Jesus, we can find a way for you to find healing from the inside out without hormones for life and sex change surgery and the like. So the contrasts are stark. And for those that are on the other side of these moral cultural issues or the pro-abortion, and then they're going to call me a hypocrite for being a follower of Jesus and supporting the president, sorry. I think you need to look in the mirror once again.